fluorescent tube still hummed above aisle 7 when I slid the last crate of canned peaches onto the shelf. The grocery always felt lonelier after midnight stock. Every color on the boxes washed gray by the unblinking lights, the distant compressor rattling like a tired heartbeat. I'd just checked my watch 12:08 when I heard his voice drift from the back office. Low and clipped the way a snake might sound if it could form words. "Don't start with me in front of employees," Mr. Lawton warned, syllables sharpened. "Buy whiskey and a full day of petty power." His wife murmured something I couldn't make out. Cardboard scraped under my gloves. I held still. The hiss that followed was ice cold, then a slap flat, flesh on flesh, too loud in the after hours. Quiet. I didn't mean to move, but my feet carried me toward the narrow hallway anyway. The office door burst open before I reached it. Mrs. Lawton Marianne, though we were never invited to use her first name, stumbled into the hall, clutching her forearm. One sleeve of her blue cardigan hung half-ripped, leaving a strip of pale skin exposed, already mottling violet. Her eyes landed on me, wide yet strangely steady, and in the pause between us I smelled the copper temps of my own fear. "Mind your business, kid," my boss barked from behind her, face red as if the slap had scorched him too. He tugged at the knot of his tie, straightened his collar, then flicked his gaze to her. "You're done here. Take your pity party somewhere else." He brushed past, shoes squealing on waxed linoleum, and marched toward the exit. The automatic doors sighed open, then thudded shut behind him. Silence poured back in, dense as water. Marianne's breath hitched. She smoothed her cardigan like any customer fixing a garment in the aisle, but her fingers shook unison. "Isn't it?" she said. I nodded, though she knew. She'd scrawled my paycheck signatures every Friday. Sliding the envelope across the counter with a small, encouraging smile neither her husband nor the neon lights could bleach. "I'm sorry. You heard that." She raised a hand to straighten her hair and winced. Do you have your car tonight?" Her question dangled there, absurdly gentle beside the rage still echoing off the walls. I saw, then, the small rolling suitcase parked just inside the office floral print. Scuffed wheels, something hastily packed there, I managed. "Yet, in the back lot, would you mind giving me a lift, just somewhere safe until morning?" I imagined saying no, how easy it would be to claim broken taillights or a curfew. Instead, I reached for her suitcase handle, surprised by its lightness, as if she'd left the weight of her life behind. We walked the length of frozen food cases turned dark to save power, her footsteps careful. My heart hammering loud enough I thought she might hear. Night air slapped our cheeks when we stepped outside. The lot was a single rectangle of puddled asphalt under one flickering lamp. My rusted Civic sat crooked between yellow lines, dented fender, college packing sticker still clinging from last semester. I tossed the suitcase into the back seat and opened the passenger door. Marianne settled in, wincing when fabric brushed her arm, then folded her hands atop her knees, wedding ring glinting like a question I wasn't brave enough to ask. "Don't live far," I told her, turning the key. The engine coughed awake. A small place, but the couch folds out. Streetlights slithered by in dull streaks as we drove. She stared through the windshield, expression unreadable, until the groceries neon sign disappeared behind a bend. Then her shoulders sagged as though distance itself were anesthesia. "He's never fired me before," she whispered more to the window than me. "Never tossed me out. Bruised me, yes, but sorry. Too much information." "I'd rather know the truth than keep guessing," I said, and felt my hands tighten on the wheel. Rain began, gentle, a static hush. Wipers squeaked, clearing arcs of clarity that lasted only seconds before water blurred them again. At the four-way stop near my apartment, the street lamp revealed the bruise blooming along her jaw, muted purple already edging to black. She followed my eyes but said nothing. I wanted to say everything, how it wasn't her fault, how people would help, but I settled for turning the heater higher. Warm airflow lifted a strand of her hair, and the citrus lavender shampoo scent filled the car, soothing and out of place among old fast food wrappers on the floorboard. We climbed the outside stairs of my building, wood slick from rain, the hallway. It smelled of boiled potatoes and someone's late-night detergent. Inside my apartment, one room arranged around a futon and a particle board desk. I flicked on the lamp. Gold lights softened the peeling wallpaper and highlighted dust motes spiraling slowly in the stale air. "It's not fancy," I said, suddenly embarrassed by the pile of textbooks on the counter. Labor economics, introduction to poetry, spine cracked at different chapters because I couldn't choose a future. "But the couch is comfortable enough." "It's beautiful," she replied, voice so earnest I almost laughed. She unzipped her suitcase halfway, withdrew a gray t-shirt and sweatpants that had clearly been his, cut down to fit her. A small, defiant act of repurposing. I turned away while she changed, pretending to stack plates in the sink. Steam rose from the faucet, fogging the cracked window. Behind me the futon creaked as she sat. "Do you drink tea?" she asked. "I have instant coffee." "Coffee's fine." I filled my chipped kettle and set it on the single electric burner. The metal ticked as it warmed. In the quiet, rain drummed on the roof like hesitant applause, and I felt absurdly formal to strangers in a scene too intimate for introductions. When the kettle sputtered, I poured coffee into the lone mug. Boned hairline cracked down the handle like a fault line. I'd meant to replace it, never found the spare dollars. She accepted it with both hands, thumb smoothing the crack as if she understood something private about keeping broken things functional. Thank you, Nathan, of course. She sipped, hissed at the heat, and smiled for the first time, small, but it reached her eyes. I dragged the desk chair opposite the couch. The lamp's light haloed her face, highlighting freckles I'd never noticed beneath the harsh grocery fluorescence. Do you know where you'll go after tonight? I asked. Her gaze drifted to the rain-streaked window. Not yet. One night at a time, I suppose. I'll find a room, some work. I'm good with books, receipts. You kept that store running, I said before I could filter it. It was true. Everyone knew the ledgers balanced because of her. My boss only bragged about profits he barely understood. She smiled again, softer. You notice things. Silence swelled, but not uncomfortably. I traced the steam fading off the coffee pot. She tucked a blanket over her knees. A bruise on her wrist peeked from the sleeve. Without thinking, I grabbed the small first aid kit from under the sink and set it on the coffee table. Gore's antiseptic cream, a few bandages. May I asked. She hesitated, then extended her arm. The skin felt too warm under my cautious fingers. I dabbed ointment where the fabric had scraped her, wrapped loose gauze so it wouldn't press. Each turn of the bandage felt like a promise I couldn't name. You have a gentle touch, she murmured. Her lashes were damp not from tears, I realized, but from pure exhaustion. I'm sorry you were dragged into this. I'd rather be here than pretending I didn't hear him, I said. Stay as long as you need. The words surprised me. They sounded grown, decisive. She inhaled, ragged at the edges, and nodded. Lights in the hallway clicked off automatically, plunging the apartment into deeper amber. I unfolded the futon, sheets smelling faintly of detergent and textbooks stored beneath. She lay back, hands clasped over the blanket, eyes following the ceiling fan's slow revolution. I'll be right over there, I said, pointing to the desk chair. If you need anything, you should sleep. I will. But I didn't. I watched until her breathing steadied, until the set of her mouth softened from tension into something near peace. The bruise on her jaw caught the lamp glow, storm cloud on skin, and I felt anger coil inside me, hot, rattling, useless in the moment. I let it simmer, promising myself it would become something better than rage. When I finally crawled onto the floor with a spare blanket, dawn was flirting with the curtains, washing them pale blue. Outside, rain eased to a whisper. Inside, her suitcase sat in the corner like a guest at the edge of a dance floor, waiting for the next song. It would only be one night, I told myself again, closing my eyes. But the apartment already felt different, larger somehow, as if her quiet breathing had carved a new room in the air. And for the first time in months, sleep approached me gently, like a hand offered in trust instead of command. The apartment began to stretch and settle around her like it was meant to hold to people. In the mornings, I'd wake to the soft clink of her rinsing the mug she'd used the night before. The kettle would whistle at 6:04 a.m. like always, and I'd hear her padding across the tile in borrowed socks, pouring water as if she'd always lived here. She didn't ask where anything was, she simply watched, remembered, adjusted. Like she'd been a missing piece. The place had already shaped itself around. My textbooks stayed sprawled across the kitchen table, dog-eared and scribbled with notes in the margins. I told myself I should clean them up, make it neater, but she never complained. Instead, she'd fold the blanket I kicked off the futon each night, or sew a loose button back onto my coat with thread from a pocket tin she kept beside her toothbrush. Her presence was quiet, but it touched everything. She fixed the torn sleeve of her cardigan too, the one from the night she'd left, sat cross-legged on the couch with a patch of fabric she cut from an old scarf, stitching it into place with slow, careful hands. I watched from the desk, pretending to read, and found myself more interested in the motion of her fingers than the page. There was something steadying about it. Not erasing damage, just softening its edge. We didn't talk much during the day, not in full sentences anyway. Instead, our conversations drifted in and out of shadows over breakfast toast, while the microwave hummed through the doorway when one of us paused on the way to the bathroom. She'd ask about the poetry course I never mentioned out loud, or why I put salt on the rim of my coffee mug when I felt anxious. I'd ask if she missed working, or if she'd always kept her hair in a low knot like that. She'd smile faintly, like something about the question reminded her of who she used to be. The bruises on her wrists faded from deep blue to yellow, then vanished completely. But I still saw the way she moved when she thought I wasn't looking, like she expected the floor to shift beneath her. Sometimes she'd glance at me while I was slicing bread, her gaze lingering just a moment too long, then flicking away as though she'd startled herself. The weather turned midweek. Rain came heavy and sudden, beating down on the windows like fists on a locked door. Around midnight, the power cut out. I found her in the hallway, a flashlight gripped in one hand, her other steadying herself against the wall. She blinked when she saw me, then let out a breath that wasn't quite relief but wasn't fear either. "Candlelight okay?" I asked, holding up a box I'd fished from the cabinet. "It's better than the dark," We lit 2 candles and set them on opposite ends of the room. The glow turned our faces into soft sketches, made the wallpaper seem warmer than it ever had in daylight. I handed her a blanket, the thick one I usually kept folded at the end of the bed, and she curled her legs beneath her on the couch like it was the only safe place in the world. Neither of us said much at first, just the sound of rain filtering through the cracks in the window, the occasional drip from the ceiling near the bathroom door. She reached for the coffee mug I'd forgotten to wash, held it between her palms as if it still carried heat. "Do you ever feel like your life started after something ended?" she asked suddenly, eyes tracing the candle flame. I nodded. "Sometimes I think I've only been half awake since college, like I've been waiting for someone to shake me." She laughed, soft and unexpected. "Then maybe this blackout's a gift." I asked her what she used to dream about. She looked at me, lips parting slightly, then said she wanted to run a used bookstore once, one with a bell over the door and a kettle always warm behind the counter. Somewhere people could come to breathe, she said, and maybe forget who they were supposed to be for a while. I told her I'd come every day. She didn't answer, but her gaze lingered in mine longer than before. There was something unspoken in the way our eyes held, not promise, not confession, but a deep pause, like standing at the edge of something without needing to jump. I noticed how her fingers curled around the mug's crack like it meant something to her now too. Later, as the rain softened and the wax burned low, she handed me a second blanket. I spread it across the futon while she stretched out across the cushions, her hand tucked beneath her cheek. The candlelight caught the faint scar along her wrist, faded now, barely visible but still there. "I'm sorry the lights went out," I murmured. She shook her head against the pillow. "This feels safer somehow, like the dark can't see us." I sat back in the desk chair, legs aching from standing, and watched the flame flicker against the far wall. I didn't realize I'd fallen asleep until I woke to morning light and the faint smell of tea leaves steeping from the kettle, which must have clicked on again when the power returned. She was already awake, humming something tuneless while standing barefoot in the kitchen wearing my old hoodie. The rain had stopped. The apartment smelled of steam and citrus soap and quiet, a new kind of quiet, one that made you want to stay still and not ruin it. The spare key lived on a rusted nail by the door, usually forgotten behind my baseball cap. On a Tuesday that smelled of thawing sidewalks and old radiator heat, I took it down and pressed the metal into her palm. "Just in case I'm ever late," I said, trying for casual, as though it weren't a silent declaration that she already belonged to the rhythm of this place. The key looked too large against her fingers. She turned it over once, twice, then slipped it into the little coin pocket of her jeans, like a secret. That afternoon, while I highlighted notes for an overdue economics paper, she sat at the kitchenette, the cracked mug between us, a brush dipped in leftover house paint and yellow from the time I'd tried to brighten the windowsill rifted in slow circles around the fracture. Petals bloomed across the ceramic, each stroke softening the split line until it looked less like damage and more like an intentional vein of light. "Things don't break further if they think they're wanted," she said, smiling at her own superstition. I made a joke about needing entire fields of flowers for my student debt. She laughed, the quiet kind that fills spaces no lamp could warm. We rearranged our habits around unspoken caution. At dawn, streets still silver with dew, we'd drive to the 24-hour supermarket on the edge of town. She liked the emptiness, aisles echoing produce, mist spritzing like distant rain. I'd push the cart while she read the tiny labels, comparing prices, always reaching for the bruised fruit first as if rescuing the overlooked was her private rule. Sometimes she'd tug my sleeve to show me a strange brand of tea or a loaf discounted for being misshapen, and our laughter would linger above the gleaming linoleum like steam. One morning the sky bruised lavender. We stepped outside with our bags and almost collided with a black sedan idling near the cart returns. My boss leaned against the hood, arms folded. A cigarette ember flared between his fingers, the smoke curling around the smirk he wore as comfortably as his suit. The parking lot felt suddenly vast and airless. Even the gull perched on the light post went silent. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes drifted from me to her, then down to the canvas tote slung over her shoulder. I could taste metal on my tongue. She tightened her grip on the bag but kept her gaze steady. Chin lifted a fraction that said she owed him nothing, not a step, not a word. After a heartbeat that felt like a loaded chamber, she slid her arm through mine and steered us toward the car. Gravel cracked beneath our shoes. He flicked ash, chuckled under his breath, and climbed back inside. The engine rumbled like distant thunder but didn't follow. Only when we'd turned the corner did I realize my shoulders were locked so tight they ached. She exhaled then, a shaky ribbon of breath. "He always liked showdowns in public," she murmured. "Less cleanup." I wanted to answer with something brave, but all I managed was opening the passenger door and loading the bags with clumsy speed. On the drive home we spoke of mundane things, the price of rice, the radio song stuck in her head, every sentence fragile, floating above the unsaid fear clinging to our skin. That night, rain returned, gentle but persistent, tapping Morse code across the windows. Power stayed on, yet we lit a candle anyway, letting its halo blur the edges of the room. She brewed the odd-shaped tea we'd bought, something floral that turned the water sunset pink. We sat cross-legged on the floor, mug between us, sunflower, facing out like a compass pointing somewhere better. She twirled the spoon, watching the liquid settle. "Can I tell you a story?" she asked. The question felt ceremonial, as if she were handing me another key. Heavier than metal. I nodded. I almost signed a 5-year lease on a storefront once, corner of Maple and 3rd tiny place with peeling, green trim. I pictured shelves of mismatched mugs, a glass jar for tips, a chalkboard menu I'd change with the seasons, breakfast pastries at dawn, soup simmering by lunchtime. I saved designs for the logo sunlight through steam. She laughed softly, then real life barged in, said dreams don't pay mortgages. I shelved the idea like an old book, told myself it was childish. I pictured her in that imagined cafe, apron dusted with flour, morning light painting stripes across reclaimed wood. She would greet regulars by name, slip an extra cookie to the lonely, hum along with the radio while wiping tables. The image struck me with unreasonable clarity, and my chest tightened around an ache I hadn't felt before. Something more than protectiveness, sharper than simple affection. Longing, I realized, but not just for her, for the version of myself who might stand behind that counter beside her, sleeves rolled, content to count hours and cups poured. "What if childish is exactly what the world needs?" I asked, voice a notch above whisper. She met my eyes. Candlelight softened the lines around them, eyes that had watched so much leave and somehow still opened each morning. "Would you visit?" she said. I'd build the sign. My mouth moved before my doubts could marshal. Silence gathered, but it was rich, like soil after rain. Outside, tires hissed over wet asphalt. Somewhere a neighbor's door thudded. Inside, her fingers traced the sunflower petals cooling under her touch. She set the mug down, but her hand remained on the table, open, palm upward, half an invitation, half a test. I placed mine beside it, not quite touching, letting the heat between skin fill the distance. We didn't speak again until wax overflowed, and the flame guttered out, leaving only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rains. Tired applause. When we rose, I noticed she left the spare key on the counter rather than hanging it back on the nail. It glinted there, dull brass, ordinary yet shifted permanently. A promise forged from small gestures, quiet laughter, and a single painted flower that refused to let a fracture spread. The knock yanked me from a shallow sleep. 3 blows that rattled the cheap wood like someone trying to punch daylight through it. Another followed harder, impatient, and the picture frames shook on the walls. The clock on the microwave read 12:47 a.m. Rain splattered the window, thick enough to mute the city's neon pulse outside. She was already standing in the hallway, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, eyes wide the way people look at lightning before the thunder arrives. I crossed the room in 2 strides and placed a hand on the doorframe to steady the tremor in my arms. "Marianne," his voice slurred through the gap, soaked in whiskey and water. "Open up. You belong to Medu, you hear me?" I slid the chain, latch into place, then leaned close enough to the peephole for the cool metal to sting my skin. Mr. Lawton's face loomed on the other side, rain streaking his dress shirt so it clung to his chest like a second, angrier skin. His tie hung crooked, not undone, eyes red, jaw clenched, an animal cornered by its own thirst. "She's not coming out," I said, voice low but clear. He slammed his palm against the door, a sound like a mallet on wet earth. Marianne flinched. The blanket slipped, exposing the sunflower-mended sleeve beneath. I motioned her back, then picked up my phone. 911. My thumb hesitated a fraction, an old instinct to avoid trouble, then pressed call. The dispatcher answered in clipped professionalism. I whispered our address, said the words, domestic threat, drunk, violent history. She promised cars on the way, told me to stay on the line. I propped the phone on speaker atop the entry table. The dispatcher's calm, a faint tether to sanity. Rant continued, muffled by the door. Accusations, please, threats. He rattled the knob, cursed when the chain held. Endless seconds dragged, each bang sinking with the thunder outside. "Nathan," Marianne said, barely audible. She held the patch-painted mug between both hands, though it sat empty. Her knuckles were white around the ceramic sunflower turned toward her like a shield. "He can't get in," I told her, hoping certainty would bloom from the statement. I wedged my shoulder against the doorframe anyway, feeling every shove reverberate through bone. Sirens cut through the rain, rising and falling like a promise delivered. The pounding stopped. I peeked again. Lawton staggered back, head swiveling, toward the flashing red-blue glow sliding across the wet parking lot. He squared his shoulders, tried for dignity. Failed. His soaked shoes squeaked as he attempted to compose himself. Police footsteps splashed nearer. 2 officers, 1 male, 1 female, approached, hands resting on holstered calm. The dispatcher's voice said, "They've arrived," before disconnecting. I unhooked the chain but kept the door cracked. "Evening," I greeted, voice hoarse. The female officer nodded. "Sir, please step back. We need to speak with the gentleman outside." Lawton's defiance faltered under their twin beams of flashlight. He tried charm first, slurred apologies about a misunderstanding, claims he'd come to retrieve his wife. When that failed, anger leaked through the cracks. She was his responsibility. She was unstable. Why else would she hide in a boy's apartment? The officers listened, stone-faced, then turned to me. She has a right to be here, the male officer asked. Guest in my home, I said. Marianne stepped forward, voice trembling yet steady. I left. He fired me, threw me out, and tonight, he came uninvited. The officers exchanged a silent verdict born from too many midnights like this. The female cop produced a form, her pen scratching beneath a drip of the awning. Ma'am, would you like an emergency protective order? Marianne nodded, eyes locked on the wet pavement rather than her husband's fury. Lawton barked something unintelligible. The male officer guided him aside as though redirecting a toddler having a tantrum. Handcuffs didn't click. Public drunkenness wasn't enough, but the threat of them hovered. He was warned. One violation of the forthcoming restraining order and he'd ride in the back of their cruiser. The words hit him like cold water. His shoulders sagged, bravado draining into the gutters. When the paperwork was signed and glaring where rain kissed the page, the officers escorted him to his car. He shot one final look toward our door, confused, wounded, dangerous in its impotence. Then the engine snarled awake and reversed into darkness. I thanked the officers, accepted the carbon copy of the order. They advised changing locks, then drove off, tail lights dissolving into mist. Only the hush of rain remained, suddenly gentle now that the storm inside the hallway had passed. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, slid the chain back. For a moment we stood there, breaths ragged, listening to the walls reacquaint themselves. With quiet, Marianne's hands began to shake so hard the mud clinked against her teeth. I set it aside and guided her to the floor, backs against the cool plaster, knees bent, feet bare on cracked linoleum. The room smelled of damp wool and late-night adrenaline. She pressed her forehead to her knees. I thought he'd break through, she whispered. He didn't, I answered, though my heart still thudded like a fist on wood. He can't. She lifted her head, eyes shimmering in the faint light from the stove clock. It's over. The words were wonder, not certainty. For tonight and tomorrow, and the next, as long as the order stands. You're free. The phrase tasted strange, fragile, but true. Her shoulders shook half-sob, half-released, and she exhaled until the tension drained from her limbs. When she looked up, tears had carved clean lines down, cheeks flushed with relief. She let out a small, incredulous laugh that sounded like a window opening after years of paint-sealed silence. We sat there until our breathing matched the rhythm of the gutters outside. Minutes blurred, then an hour. The radiator clicked on, filling the silence with a sleepy hiss. Somewhere a neighbor's baby cried and settled again. Gradually, the darkest slice of night lifted. Pale blue seeped through the curtains, dusting the floorboards with first light. She leaned her head against my shoulder, a tentative weight that felt both light and momentous. I didn't move, afraid any shift would scatter the fragile piece assembling around us. Dawn spread across the wall, painting our silhouettes in milky gold, the kind of light that makes everything look new, or at least salvageable. Thank you, she breathed. You don't have to thank me, I said, though part of me glowed at the words. Outside, the city woke. A distant bus hissed. A bird tried a half-hearted chirp. Inside, we remained on the kitchen floor, two passengers finally disembarking from a night that had tried to swallow us. The bruises on her wrist were nearly gone. The one on my chest, that ache of wanting more than safety for her, flared softly, warm against the cooling fear. When the sun cleared the rooftops, she straightened and offered a shaky smile. The restraining order form lay on the counter, edges damp but ink intact. The sunflower mug waited beside it, fracture hidden beneath, bright petals proof that even cracked things could hold warmth if guarded through the night. The official envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, thin and unimposing, the county seal embossed like a pressed flower at the corner. She signed twice, once for the certified mail, once on the final line acknowledging that the permanent restraining order was now entered into record. When she handed me the papers, her hands were steady, but her exhale carried months of held breath. We set the document on the windowsill where early light washed across the ink, and for a quiet moment simply watched it dry. As if the law itself needed sun to cure. Life slid into a gentle pattern after that. I still stalked night shifts at the grocery, though rumors said management might change. She rose before sunrise, brewed tea, and stretched on the balcony with a stiffness that dissolved more each day. The bruises were long gone. What lingered was a new alertness in her posture, an awareness of space that looked less like caution and more like possibility. One Saturday she counted out 3 crisp bills onto the kitchen table. Rent, she declared. The gesture felt like a wedge between us, polite but sharp. I pushed the money back, told her the couch didn't have a meter. We argued in hushed voices that tripped over gratitude and pride until she finally tucked the bills back into her wallet. Cheeks flushed with something unsaid. The following evening she slipped a folded deed beneath my economics textbook. I almost tossed it aside, thinking it more class notes, but the parchment weight stopped me. The property address was familiar, a shuttered corner cafe 2 blocks from campus, windows newspapered for years. Her signature rested beside an old landlord's scroll, and beneath it, a single sticky note. If you won't take rent, take a dream instead. She was in the kitchenette scrubbing carrots when I approached, the faucet rushing loud as a river between us. "You've been paying on a lease this whole time?" I asked. She shrugged, unsure, a wet carrot suspended like a confession. I couldn't let it go, even when everything else fell apart. That space felt unfinished. "It's not rent, Marianne," I said, voice low. "It's your life." "It could be ours," she corrected, and the word landed soft but subtle. Water drummed into steel. Her eyes held the reflection of the facet's shine. "Help me bring it back, Nathan. Let me pay in paint and sawdust and early mornings that belong to both of us." I didn't answer in words. I dried my hands on. Adishtuel found the key still warm from her pocket and slid it onto my ring beside the spare to the apartment. The clink echoed like a clock striking some new hour. We began in late April when the air smelled of thawing earth and chalk dust from campus sidewalks. The cafe interior was a mausoleum of good intentions. Broken stool legs, burlap coffee sacks stiff with age, a counter scarred by time and mice. Sunlight filtered through grime in long slanted beams that made the dust look like quiet constellations. She stood in the middle, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and turned slowly as if reacquainting herself with an old friend who'd lost weight but kept the same smile. Our days became lists, bleach, sunpaper, premier, weekend yard sales for mismatched chairs, late-night internet bids on a dented espresso machine that arrived smelling faintly of Italy and burnt hope. She sang under her breath while sanding the bar top, a tune I couldn't name but began to hum along. In the evenings we returned, home speckled white and ochre, shoes full of sawdust, hair smelling of lemon solvent. I'd cook boxed macaroni because it was quick, and she'd line the windowsill with a day's small finds, a spoon with a rose at its handle, a cobalt sugar shaker, a postcard someone once mailed from a beach we decided to visit someday. Language of renovation slipped into our mouths, talk of bevels and water stains, of whether the exposed brick should stay raw or wear a coat of matte sealant. Yet underneath each practical choice beat an undercurrent of tenderness. She'd guide my wrist when I fumbled with the paint roller, her palm steady on my forearm. I'd lift her by the waist so she could reach the transom window, feeling the laugh in her ribcage when my balance wavered. At night, muscles aching, we'd sit on the scuffed floorboards and trace invisible blueprints in the air where shelves might go. How morning light would fall across a row of mugs waiting for stories. The sunflower cup remained our compass. She insisted it sit atop the counter even during demolition, its petals bright against the gloom, a reminder that fractures turned to art could survive anything. One afternoon I caught her staring at the mug, fingers spread on the wood as though absorbing its stubborn optimism. She looked up, cheeks streaked with primer, and smiled so wide I felt the future tilt closer. A week before opening, she convinced a local baker to supply pastries on consignment. We tested drip blends until caffeine skittered through our veins, laughing at the accidental concoctions that tasted like campfire or citrus dreams. She designed a chalkboard menu, lettering careful, small sunflowers curling around the edges. I carved a sign from reclaimed pine-sun and steam calf, each groove filled with gold paint she dabbed on with the same brush that once mended a mug. Grand opening morning dawned clear, the sky a fresh sheet waiting for ink. We arrived before first light. She wore a simple linen dress smudged with a paint fingerprint I'd left days earlier. She hadn't washed it out. I straightened a stack of coasters. She adjusted a vase of wildflowers scavenged from a vacant lot. At 6 on the dot we flipped the window sign from closed to open, and the bell above the door chimed in the hush like a heartbeat. No customers yet, only the two of us, standing on opposite sides of the reclaimed oak bar. She reached beneath the counter, lifted the sunflower mug, and set it on the polished wood with reverence. Steam curled from its rim, catching the newborn sun that spilled through cleaned glass. She slid it toward me as if across an invisible line we'd tiptoed around for months. "You gave me shelter," she whispered, voice velvet rough from early hours and everything we'd survived. "Let this be yours too." My fingers wrapped around the familiar crack, now varnished smooth. Heat seeped into my palms, but what spread through my chest was warmer still, a realization that none of the walls we'd repainted were as transformative as the ones that had quietly relocated inside me. Home, I understood, wasn't the apartment or even this luminous space smelling of cinnamon and fresh varnish. It was the corridor of breath between our words, the silence where our laughter landed, the shared blueprint of mornings still to come. I looked up to answer and found her watching with an expression I'd seen only in sketches of saints, equal parts wonder and certainty. The bell over the door rang our first customer. Perhaps, but the sound felt distant, like birds winging high above a valley neither of us feared crossing anymore. I raised the mug in a small toast and took the first sip. It tasted less like coffee and more like the promise of sun after a relentless storm. She smiled. I swallowed the warmth, and in that simple exchange, steam curling, petals bright, her hand resting daringly close to mine, the room settled around us. No longer a project but a beginning. Outside, footsteps approached and voices tangled with city bustle, yet inside time lingered, generous and unhurried, as if the universe had found the perfect place to pause and breathe before turning its next page.